Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Josh Bressers. I'm a security strategist at Red Hat. And today, we're going to talk about Red Hat Security Roadmap. That's a super exciting topic, right? For those of you who don't know, that is my Twitter handle on the screen. I'm going to cover all these topics relatively briefly. We're not going to go deep. That's not the point of this talk. There are other talks throughout the conference that will cover virtually every one of these topics. But if there's something you'd like to know more about, come find me. And if you can't, ping me on Twitter, or you can send me an email. My email is actually my last name, bressers@redhat.com. And I'd love to answer any of your questions or talk to any of you about anything, quite frankly. Security is my thing. It's what I've been doing at Red Hat for 12 years now. So I've seen it all twice. And it's a topic I love and something I'm extremely passionate about. So without further ado, and of course my clicker quits working. Let's move this over here. All right, so roadmap, right? This is a roadmap talk. It's not a crystal ball. So I'm going to warn you all now. We're going to talk about some things Red Hat's working on today. Some of it's actually happening right now and almost ready to be out. Some of it is out because when we started talking about this, we weren't quite ready yet, and it might be out now, maybe it's not. But most importantly is that some of this is going to change, right? Consider this kind of my little legal warning ahead of time. Some of it's going to happen, some of it isn't. So please don't hold me to anything. And of course, ask me questions. Some of it's going to change names. Some of these names aren't great, and we're going to fix them later. So kind of typical disclaimer warning there, right? So Red Hat's not a security company, right? So why do we have a security roadmap at something like the Red Hat Summit? And this is something I get asked a lot, actually. Red Hat was here at RSA, in fact, in this building, a couple months ago. People kept saying, you know, this is a security conference. What are you guys doing here? And so here's the deal with Red Hat, is we are starting to recognize that security is insanely important. If I asked you guys, how many of you have compliance issues, or you have a security team you have to deal with, or you are part of your security team and you have to deal with all those, you know, terrible sysadmins who keep breaking the rules? Everyone's going to raise their hand. Security is on everyone's mind today. It is a huge deal. In fact, I don't know if any of you saw, there's something called the security passport that came in the bag you got. You can get a YubiKey if you get it all stamped. Go see what we've got, right? This is kind of a featuring of Red Hat's offerings today, that you can go and talk to real people at these booths and get an understanding for, you know, what can we help you with right now. Because security isn't about a security product. There's no magic box you can buy that's going to fix it all. There's no solution you're going to go to one vendor with and get it dealt with. Security is something now that we all have to think about. It's everyone's responsibility, and it's something that Red Hat is obviously taking very seriously. We've taken seriously for a long time. I mean, I've been at Red Hat doing security work for 12 years. There aren't a lot of companies that have had security people for 12 years at them, right? So this is definitely something we take extremely seriously. Up there is a picture I made when my boss actually said, I want you to put all of Red Hat security technologies in one picture. And I told him it couldn't be done. And I still believe it can't be done. But this is what it came up with. And this is to give you an idea of security isn't one thing. We don't have one security product. We don't have one security feature. Security is something we put in everything we do. It's something we think about throughout the entire product lifecycle. And funny enough, security is something we think about at the end of the product life cycle, which is something a lot of people don't do. And I'm not going to dwell on that today, but end of life, when it comes to security, is just as important as the day it comes out. So this is how I like to think about security. It's not about buying a firewall and you're done, or buying the IDS and you're done, or buying your identity provider and then you're done, right? It starts at the bottom. And when I say secure foundation in this context for Red Hat, it's really the people. It's open source. How many of you know where all of your software comes from? Nobody can answer that. And in fact, open source won is what I like to say. It's in every product you buy and use today. Every tablet on these tables, every cell phone, every computer is running open source software, even if you don't know it. And so this is where Red Hat starts, is we have that open source foundation. And we work our way up, right? We have the secure platform, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Red Hat Enterprise Linux has always been viewed as a secure product. And it's not an accident. We didn't get lucky. It's hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, many sleepless nights for people like me that got it there. And then we work our way up. Now we're moving up the stack. We've got our cloud products. We've got middleware. We've got everything going on today, the APIs, it all has to have security as part of it, right? And then it stops at the top with you guys. If you don't use it securely, it doesn't matter how secure it is at the bottom. There's a group, actually, I talked to at one point that was talking about how do we start measuring security for the purpose of things like compliance and insurance and just overall what's going on in this environment. And the thing you keep coming back to is it doesn't matter how good the products are you've got. If you've got a bonehead sysadmin who screws it up, you lose. I mean, and that's terrifying, right? Is there another industry? Well, there's probably a couple, but practically speaking, there's not a lot of industries where one person can literally undo everything everyone else has worked hard on, right? And this reminds me always of those TV shows where it's, you know, the worst accidents ever, and they show, you know, the buildings falling down and things. But it's not dissimilar, right? So let's start at the foundation. When I say foundation, we're going to talk about essentially RHEL in this context, a little bit of the open source thing, but I'm going to focus on Red Hat's things and what we're doing and what's coming. I don't want to bore you guys with the things that have already happened. You know, there's plenty of booths, go talk to those people. So we start with crypto in this context, okay? Crypto is on everybody's minds all the time these days. And so some of the things Red Hat's working on now is we split it up into 3 groups, okay? There's maintenance. That would make sense, right? This is fixing bugs, making sure things are sane. Things like doing upgrades to OpenSSL, for example, carrying things along, making sure that we can stay current and we're keeping the lights on when it comes to crypto and the products. And now because we're talking about foundation, all of Red Hat's products build off of this stuff. The crypto libraries in the bottom are what all the products above are going to use. So we need to make sure we get it right. If we screw this up, we screw up everything on top of it. Right? Makes sense. Deprecation is the next one. This is huge right now. There have been a couple of security issues in the last year that relied on old protocols being allowed in various security libraries. In the past, we would say, oh, an old protocol, no big deal, just don't use it. But it turns out there's attacks that use it. And so this is now something we need to pay attention to and we need to think about. So turning off things like SSL v2, we used to say, oh yeah, whatever, we'll get to that. But that's not true anymore. It's terrifying now if you look at some of these attacks and the things people are working on. So now we're taking an active role into looking at what's happening out there in the universe, because let's face it, it's a big universe. And we want to understand what are the protocols that people need, and what are the ones they don't need and are dangerous to keep there. Because unfortunately, the good old days of just adding more crap and ignoring the old stuff are long gone. But now there's also the vision aspect, and this is where it actually gets exciting. Who knows what a quantum computer is? Right? Nobody knows. Put your hands down, right? Who knows? But here's the point, right? There's all this talk about quantum computers are coming. Brace yourselves, right? And they're going to ruin cryptography, and they're going to come and, you know, kidnap the pets, and who knows what they're going to do. But this is something we have to understand, right? This is something we're paying attention to, is we have smart people that are looking at what does it mean if the quantum computers can do what people think they can? What do we have to do for cryptography? And it's terrifying because, quite frankly, we don't have the answers today. There's talk of various things. I think is a lattice framework cryptography is a big one that gets a lot of talk right now. But what does that mean, right? We don't know. But here's the beauty of it, is the way Red Hat works and the way most software works in general, if we update the libraries and the foundation, you get that benefit all the way up the stack, right? That's one of the huge advantages we get there. And then the other one we're working on that's going to be big, and this is something that's going to affect you guys right now, is managing your cryptography across your systems. Is today, I don't know how many of you have done this, but if you need to adjust your policies around what protocols you allow, what ciphers you allow, what you want to do with crypto, it's kind of a one-off thing where you kind of need to go to every single application and you need to define what's going on. Well, we're working on making it so you're going to be able to just define it for the whole system. You could say, you know, this system only allows TLS 1.2, and magically, that's what's going to happen, right? And that'll obviously tie into the management products, and you can kind of move that up the stack, and it's going to be fantastic. So that is coming very soon. That's something that's actually happening in Fedora right now, of the System Management Crypto Project. It's very exciting, and I look forward to it. Excuse me. So we'll keep moving. Yeah, we love this one, right? Who doesn't like compliance? Who likes it? Auditor comes by every now and then, right? We all love audit day. So here's the deal, is I like to tell people, you're compliant for a day, if you're lucky, right? The auditor comes in, he checks you out, tells you what's wrong, you fix it. He checks you out, tells you what's wrong, you fix it. Keep doing this for a month, and then finally you pass your audit. Everyone's happy, and then you break something immediately. That's crazy. Right? It's the way it is. In fact, I had one person tell me one time they think they were compliant for 30 days. I don't believe them, but it's a good story to tell, right? So here's the deal, is we understand how hard this is for you guys to deal with. And it's hard for us in some cases. If you look up there, I have two categories. There's product compliance, and we call it procedural compliance. Product compliance is the stuff we get for our products, right? I've got common criteria, FIPS, and SCAP up there. I don't know if any of you have ever gone through a FIPS or Common Criteria compliance session, but it's a lot of work, right? And it's not overly pleasant for that matter. But this is something we're going to keep doing. FIPS is changing. Common Criteria is changing. We're part of the standards organizations working on this stuff. We're going to make sure our products keep getting this because it's important for a lot of you guys. And now, not for everybody, I'll admit. Things like FIPS apply to a certain subset of people. But practically speaking, you understand that when we get these, it means we're doing something right, is what I like to tell people there. And what's coming in the future, there's for common criteria, OSPP4, OS Protection Profiles, what that's called. There's a new version coming out. We're going to support that in our products. I will not bore you with any of those details. Faster certifications. It takes a long time to get these. And the standards bodies know that too. And so we're working with them to speed this up. So it goes from maybe a year-long process to weeks or months is the idea there. And easier to use and deploy. Anyone who's ever deployed a FIP system before knows exactly what I'm talking about here. If you don't ask, all right? We understand it can be difficult. We want to make it easier is where we're going with that. But then there's something called procedural compliance. This is PCI is the big one everyone talks about today, right? How many of you guys need PCI compliance in this room? Let's see some hands. It's a lot less than I thought, actually. So PCI compliance is a payment card industry. If you do credit card processing in any way, you need this. Right? HIPAA is healthcare. Sarbanes-Oxley is publicly traded companies. There are more and more of these coming all the time. We understand there's more and more of these coming all the time, and so one of the things we're starting to look at is what can we do to help you get these? And now this is something actually I could use your help with. If there's something you guys struggle with that Red Hat isn't doing and we could do to help you, let me know. I work in the product management group. I can help get some of these changes done. And so this is something we're starting to pay attention to, right? How do we make it easier? Continuous monitoring is going to be part of that. I said you're compliant for a day. What if you could check if you're compliant every hour? There's a tool we're going to talk about in a minute called OpenSCAP that can give us some of these features. It's very exciting stuff. We'll move on. I know this is kind of the boring stuff. I'm not going to lie. We'll get to the good stuff in a minute. So one of the other things we're working on is what I like to call deterring the threats. We all get to hear about all these attacks going on, all this ransomware going on, all these hackers getting into stuff. And part of that is this low-level stuff, GCC, glibc, kernel. And so this is a place we're looking at what to do as well. I don't know, if you got to kind of be a security geek to even understand what some of this stuff means. But there's something called ROP, return-oriented programming. And that's basically how a lot of exploits work today. We're trying to figure out what can we do to stop this. We have people working on it right now in glibc, in fact. And it's not easy stuff, right? These are smart dudes. And they're a lot smarter than I am. MPX is memory protection extensions from Intel. We're working with them to get that enabled. Boot security, TPM and secure boot are hot topics for lots of people these days. What does that mean? Here's one of my complaints about TPM always is everyone wants TPM enabled, but what does that really mean? Because if you've ever used TPM, it's a nightmare. And so it's all about the management tools, right? It's how to get that stuff working correctly, make it nice. Secure boot works today, making it better. Come find me about that. I'm not going to bore you guys with details. And whitelisting. Whitelisting is exciting. This is one, what if rather than going the antivirus route of looking for the bad stuff, what if we just define what the good stuff is? Right? That makes a lot of sense, and it's going to make it a lot easier to deal with some of this in the future. In fact, the Common Criteria new OSPP version is going to require whitelisting. So it's something that's needed on multiple fronts. It's not only useful, but it's going to be a compliance issue, right? Runtime security. This is once your system's running, what can we do to protect it a little bit? SELinux, everyone's favorite thing they turn off, right? I want to ask how many of you turn it off, because I know what the answer is. But I mean, this is one of the things, right? It's hard to use. We know it's hard to use. We're going to fix it. We're going to make it easier. In fact, the new RHEL 7.3 is going to come out with something called the CIL, which is an intermediary language for SELinux. So now instead of needing to be Dan Walsh, you can actually work on some of your own policy, right? There's only one Dan Walsh, which is part of what makes it rough when you're dealing with this stuff. Container isolation. Did you guys know that containers, they don't solve all your security problems? Who knew, right? Well, it turns out, in fact, you know, we laugh at this, but at least once a week I have someone tell me, oh, I don't need to worry about security, I'm running it in a container. And then I weep. But the thing is, containers are great, right? I'm not saying they're insecure. That's certainly not my message. I like to joke. But practically speaking, any new technology doesn't start out rock solid, right? And we're working on this with containers. We're working our way in. What are the things we need to do to make sure that we can lock this stuff down and make it as secure as possible? So there's a lot of work going on around that, using things like SELinux for isolation. We've got C groups. There's all this bizarre low-level kernel technology. If you want details, come find me. I'll gladly talk about it, but I'm not going to spend time on it right now. USB guard. This is probably 7.4 is my guess. Again, not a crystal ball. USB guard is something we're working on that is going to allow us to set a policy on your system. So let's say you don't want user A to be able to plug USB things into the computer. Right? Again, that kind of comes back to a lot of the compliance and regulations can have an issue here. So with USB guard, you're going to be able to define a policy and say, this user can't plug USB devices in. This user can plug USB devices in. And so it's going to give you that level of control then over what's happening on your system, very much from a user perspective. And of course, if you have something like a server, just turn it off, right? You don't need that stuff. System D. System D has some really cool security features built into it, and literally nobody knows about it. And I blame myself mostly for not talking about this better. But for example, did you know when you start a service, you can give a service its very own /temp that's not shared across the system? There's a whole class of security issues that rely on having a shared /temp. This feature eliminates an entire class of security issues. That doesn't happen every day, right? That's cool stuff. You can have protected home and user in Etsy. Again, we reach a point where when you're running these services, things like SELinux help us confine them, understand what's going on. There are certain things that things shouldn't be doing. If your web server is sending email, something bad is happening, right? And that's something to start thinking about, is how can we consider what's going on? This is actually, this is a place containers are going to make a huge difference. Because we can do things like set SELinux policy to say, this is a mail server, right? It should not serve web pages. Or this is a web server, it should not send email. Today, that's difficult to do. So that's some exciting things coming. Network security is getting very exciting. Who knows what SDN is, right? Everyone can raise their hand. But here's the thing, is networking has always been the realm of hardware and those guys who hang out in that server room and no one talks to them and no one likes them, right? But that's all starting to change now. We've got encrypting things on the wire. Everyone wants to encrypt everything on the wire for the most part. And in fact, how many of you are running infrastructure in someone else's data center, also called the cloud, right? Yeah, when you do that, you can't send things over the wire in plain text, right? You want to secure it in some way. So there's all kinds of things going on around encrypting your data. Encrypting between VMs. What if you can't trust your own network? What if it's not your own network in some cases, right? So there's work going on there. Network isolation is a big deal for the software-defined networking. Because you don't want two, we'll say networks, using the term loosely, because let's face it, it's the same wire, it's the same gear this stuff is going through. And so this gives us some ability to kind of start segmenting this stuff. And that's all coming. It's coming in 7.3. It's going to keep coming in our products. You're going to see more and more march towards securing the network and making it easier to do. And the other thing I want you to keep in mind is all this stuff I talk about. We don't want to just dump stuff into a product like RHEL. Say, there we go, the network's secure. Look, we gave you all these tools and libraries to do it. Not at all. It's all about the management now, right? And we're going to get to that too. It's not just a matter of dumping packages into a distribution. It's about making this stuff work and making it useful. Storage is exciting. There's some interesting things going on in storage. Network-bound disk encryption, we will get to shortly. Encrypting your storage. I think if you're using any sort of compliance these days, you're going to encrypt your storage because it's a requirement, right? But the most exciting, I think, is the RADOS I define at the bottom. And this is something, oh crap, I moved the mouse. So Rados is a technology that exists in Ceph, one of our storage products. So today, if you set up pooled storage, you generally have your big pool of storage, right? And you give someone access to it, and you have some level of access control occasionally. But generally speaking, if you can get at the storage pool, you can do almost anything you want. Well, what if with something like Ceph, we gave you the ability to segment your storage pools? So you still have one pool of storage, but you have the ability to say, okay, these users can only see this part of the pool, and these users can only see this part of the pool. And so now we're reaching kind of that software-defined networking sort of idea where we're using software and technology to segment things that are physically in the same place. And that there's talks on this. Go find those guys, or come find me later, and we can gladly talk about it. Features. Inspecting your environment is becoming a huge deal, right? This kind of comes back to that continuous monitoring idea with compliance. And we have two big things kind of happening right now. There's something called common logging, which is in OpenShift right now. Go find the OpenShift guys and ask them about this. But the idea is having a log aggregator that can bring all your logs in one place. You can look at them, inspect them, understand what's going on, right? That's pretty straightforward. That's certainly not new, but it's an offering that we have in the works. And then there's also some changes to the audit subsystem. This is actually going to be kind of cool. Audit is something built into RHEL that logs events, which is totally boring. But what happens is when you have compliance requirements, you need to be able to define what events you audit and what's going on. And historically speaking, if you ever looked at an audit log before, you will tear your hair out because they're a nightmare to understand. We're going to fix that. The audit logs, in fact, the new version of audit that will go into 7.3 will have audit logs that are, well, I'll say mostly human readable. I won't say human readable, but they're a lot better, and it'll make sense. Like, for example, in the past, if you told it to watch a file, it was nice enough to tell you what the file descriptor number was that it was watching, which has no value to anybody. Now it will tell you the name of the file, right? So that's some very cool stuff. And then there's also some work going on that we're thinking about of how do we start making this stuff smart? If we're already logging all this stuff and we're watching all this stuff, what if we can add some intelligence to it to look for problems or when things are wrong? There's something called SVirt. There is a whole talk dedicated to SVirt later in the week. I would highly recommend you go see it. This is another one. This is like the systemd features I just talked about that nobody knows about. SVirt is the coolest thing we have in all seriousness related to security. I call this magic SELinux. So the idea is when you run a virtual machine, I've got this terrible diagram I built in up here, right? But fundamentally, we have your VM at the top, goes through QEMU is the process that orchestrates all of the virtual machine magic that makes all the disks and the ports and the USB and whatever you need, video, all that stuff happens there. And then you end up talking to disk and you talk to the kernel. Now the problem is, if you can go from the VM into the kernel or even to the disk, that's called a VM escape attack. They're worth a lot of money on the black market because there aren't a ton of them. And if you can get out, you can do a lot of damage. I mean, you got to think every cloud provider on the planet essentially relies on this sort of model, okay? All the clouds you guys run in-house rely on this model. Any virtualization you do relies on a model just like this. In this case, it's very specific for Red Hat, but they all do the same basic thing. What if we did this? What if we put SELinux around that QEMU process? And now we make sure things like that process can only talk to the one file it's supposed to back its disk. What if we said that process doesn't need to see the USB ports? And so what makes this so cool is SVirt is magic. You don't need to set SELinux policy. Don't turn it off. But you don't even see it. It just works. It's transparent. If you're running Rev, it's there and you don't even know it. And it's protecting your virtualized environment. That's really cool. And again, we do a terrible job of talking about this, and part of the reason is it's very hard to talk about this. There are not a lot of people on the planet who even understand how this technology works. Again, there's a whole talk about this later on in the week. Go find those guys and talk to them. One of the guys who works on this is giving the talk. And it's the Rev product manager, is the other fellow. Middleware, we have some exciting things going on there. I don't know if any of you have ever used something called JAAS, which is the Java Authentication and Authorization System. That's a mouthful. I've not used it. I'm not going to lie. I gave up Java programming a long time ago. It's a bad habit I've managed to break. But here's the thing, is a lot of this stuff that's going on in the world of technology today was built around an environment that was very different than where we exist now. We have containers, we have cloud, we have DevOps. And so things like JAAS are for the old way we do things. And so what's happening is we've got some of our middleware engineers said, well, this sucks and we're going to throw it away. We just want to build something correct. And now, I don't always approve throwing things away and starting over, but in this case, it was totally the right decision. Okay? I'm not going to blame anybody for that. The idea being, they're calling it the Electron, I can't pronounce it, I apologize, security subsystem. It's going to replace it and make it easier to do your various security-related tasks like authorization, for example, configuration management. It makes it easier. It'll be better. It's going to probably get a name change. I hope it gets a name change. Common criteria is coming for JBoss. EAP 7.1, I believe, we're targeting for that. I don't know if any of you care about that, but it is exciting and difficult to get. So that'll be fun. Keycloak, Red Hat single sign-on. Any of you guys heard of that one? So this is actually very cool. As we all know, identity is a pretty big deal these days in almost every enterprise, right? And so we have an identity, it's not a provider, it's a consumer that is called Keycloak is the upstream project. Red Hat SSO is what we're calling it. And you can use this to essentially do things like federated authentication right in your middleware apps. You don't have to write your own. Anyone who's ever done any sort of application development has probably rolled their own authentication mechanism at some point. Don't do that. It is a bad idea. All right? If you think it's a good idea, it's like rolling your own crypto, right? I think we finally reached a point where people have figured out they shouldn't roll their own crypto. Auth is next. Don't roll your own auth. Okay? They go hand in hand in that respect. And then, of course, API management. APIs are the new exciting thing going on. I don't know if you all heard, Red Hat is acquiring a company called 3Scale. And we're going to figure out how to integrate that into our portfolio now. And for those of you who don't know, the future of application development is currently looking like it is APIs, right? When you need to do something, when you need to talk to someone like Facebook or Twitter or pick an organization, it's all about that API. Anyone who's ever worked with open source software and integrated that into their environment knows how many of you have gone to more than 10 open source projects to download software and try to integrate that into your environment, right? It's a nightmare. You don't have to raise your hand. Please don't. Don't admit that, right? No. APIs are the same deal. How are you securing those? How many authentication tokens do you have? How many logins do you have to different APIs? And this is a management nightmare. And so that's the idea behind this, is what if we made it easy to manage these APIs? We can keep track of what's going on. You can keep track of authentication. So that's something to watch for as well. Now, this one is my favorite feature that I'm going to talk about today. This is something we're working on right now. It has an upstream project. It is not in RHEL. 7.4 is my hope. But we're calling it network-bound disk encryption. All right? How many of you have encrypted disks on your VMs, and you install your updates once a month or once a quarter or once a year? Let's hope it's not that. Right? And then when you reboot, what do you have to do after you reboot the machine? You got to type that password in, right? Give the intern that job on Saturday night. And so that's terrible. Or if for some reason the machine needs to be rebooted or it magically powers down or who knows, millions of things can happen. Now you need a human being available to type that password in, right? And this makes sense because you don't want unencrypted volumes living in any sort of environment. What if we broke this up and had I hesitate to call it a key store. We're going to call it a secret store in this context. But the idea is you've got your encrypted disk, you have your VM. What if instead of having the intern type in the password, we had a system that could identify the machine and essentially type the password in for you? Okay? Now the idea behind this isn't to stop bad guys necessarily, because let's face it, if a bad guy gets into your system, he's in your VM, he can read the password. The disk encryption password is in memory, so that's not the attack we're trying to stop here. What we're trying to stop here is if someone steals a disk image when the machine's powered off, or your disk dies and you got to get rid of it and replace it, or if you're let's say, deprecating an old rack of disks. The idea behind this is you don't have to worry about those disks. And this is very exciting, right? And it's not to stop bad guys. is to basically type in a password. And let's face it, the intern knowing the password is no safer than a computer knowing the password as far as most people are concerned. So this is something very new. There's a demo of this down in the Red Hat booth. If you're interested, I highly suggest you go look at it. Container security is rather exciting, we'll say. You've all heard of containers, I suspect, yes? Right? So here's the thing, right? Container security by itself it's going to be tricky. Because what I like to tell people is if containers existed when Windows 95 came out, we would still have Windows 95 containers in production today. Okay? Containers seem exciting and easy and fun right now because they don't have 20 years of legacy standing behind them. And so one of the things that we're looking at doing, and this is a number of organizations as well, is what if we start scanning containers? We start looking inside of them and figuring out what's there. Is it safe? Is it not safe? Can we trust this? Should we not trust this? Right? And so we have a tool called Atomic Scan. There should be a demo of that downstairs as well. And CloudForms can do this also. They both use the same technology called OpenSCAP, which is a scanning tool that actually came out of the public sector, funny enough, Department of Defense. They use something called OVAL, which is the, I can't even remember the acronym, I apologize. But the idea being, you have this data that says, here's what we want to do, here are the rules we have we want to scan. Then you run it, you can scan it, figure out what's going on, and it is very interesting when you start scanning these systems because you find problems you didn't know you have sometimes. How many of you have ever had to take the big binder and you sit down at the system, you open it up, and you start going through the 300 plus rules that you might have for your compliance, right? That's a nightmare. It takes hours, days, sometimes weeks to get through it. What if we could do it in 10 minutes? Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. So that's kind of the idea there, right, is what if we start automating some of this? Signing. Signing containers is not something that's well understood today. There are various solutions for this, and we aren't fans of any of them. And so what we're doing is we're trying to understand how do we sign containers in the context of the Red Hat ecosystem in a way that makes sense. There are people here who are working on that now. Go find Dan Walsh, ask him questions. I'm sure he would love to talk about it. And then again, we get back to containment technology, right? This is what I was talking about a little while ago of protecting those containers. Today, if you run a container is a lot like running a process. Don't run it as root, is a basic idea. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to set it up correctly. You can't just run a container and assume it's safe and fine. The VMs, with that SVirt I talked about, have certain protections. We have SVirt for containers, and it works to a certain degree, and it mostly protects the disk right now because of the way containers talk to the kernel. And we will ignore those horrible details and just acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of work going on to protect containers running inside of your environment. And that's going to become more and more important as time goes on because, let's face it, you can't always trust your container content. That's going to be the reality of how this all works, unfortunately, but it is. All right? Now, container scanning, I made a special slide just for this because it's super exciting, and I want you to think about this and the power we've got here. All right. So we get our containers. That's the after build, right? How do you get a container? Sometimes you find them. Sometimes you build them. My analogy is always, would you eat a sandwich you found on the ground, right? That's like going to finding containers. Exactly, right? But that's what we're dealing with here, right? Is you don't always know where some of this is coming from, and you aren't always going to know. I mean, that's the reality of it. I would love to tell everyone, you need to work with trusted content. You need to work with Red Hat. You need to build them yourself, whatever. As much as we all want to say that, let's face it, at the end of the day, you guys want to do your job, and you want to go home. That's what we all are. So you're going to do what needs to be done, okay? And that's where some of the tooling gets exciting. So what if we build our containers, we don't know what's in them, maybe we find them on the ground, whatever. We run them through a scanner. And then what if that scanner had the ability to look at things like, is it missing security updates? Does it have a password policy? Does it have passwords? What about what's it doing? Is it running too many things? Is it configured securely? Do I have a bunch of ports open that shouldn't be there? There's all kinds of questions you could ask. And that's the beauty of using a scanner. If you did this as a person, it would take you, what, hours probably to run through the list? But if we let a scanner do it, we can scan them right before we start them. And then the scanner can help make some decisions saying, yes, this container is okay, or no, this container isn't. And actually, CloudForms has this built in. Go find those guys and ask them about it, because it's very exciting as well. They can scan containers before they even run. So what we actually did was there was a security issue called Drown that came out. Man, it was at RSA. It was in February, because I remember I was here, in fact, when that happened. Anyway, so Drown comes out, and it's all about how you have your computer configured, your server. If it's using SSL v2, you got problems. And so we actually, CloudForms had the ability to essentially scan containers and virtual machines looking for the use of SSL v2. And if it was there, it wouldn't run them. That's cool, right? I mean, that's really cool. That's exciting. And we'll get, there's another tool called Insights that we'll get to that was part of this process to look for that. But like, that's the future, right? If you're running thousands or millions of containers in your infrastructure, a human can't keep track of that. We can't find our car keys most days. There's no way we're going to keep track of thousands of systems. Because, I mean, let's face it, while a container is meant to be a process, you can think of it almost like running a new system, is what you have in some of these cases. And so that's where we need that scanning. I mentioned SCAP. So SCAP, it's been around for a really long time. It's primarily been public sector focused. That's where the rules came from. That's basically what the rules are. We call it the STIG, is the thing that defines all those rules we use. Okay? And so what we're working on there is something we're calling the SCAP Workbench. I shouldn't say we're working on. This is another tool. It exists, right? No one knows about it. SCAP Workbench lets you take these SCAP rules and work with them nicely with a tool that makes sense to humans. If you've ever looked at the OVAL content, it's XML, and it's horrible. It looks like something that was created by the government, because it was, right? So the idea is we want to make it easier, and the SCAP Workbench will do that. In 7.3, we're upgrading the SCAP Workbench to make it much, much nicer and much easier to use, which means you can take this list of literally like hundreds of rules that exist today. In fact, I think it's like 980 or something right now. It's a ton of rules. You can take these in. You can look at what you care about for your environment, because let's face it, you don't all have the same rules you care about. If you're running in the DoD in a trusted network, it's going to be very different than if you're running, a network of 30 machines that are serving files. That's just how it is. We're fixing the rules. We're always adding new rules. I just found out yesterday, in fact, we have a new profile for law enforcement that was just added for SCAP. I had no idea. I mean, it's crazy what's going on out there, right? This is very much, we're trying to turn this into that community project. It's what Jim talked about in the keynote earlier today. It's all about working together. We're, all of us are smarter than none of us sort of thing, right? Compliance verification, I mentioned that already. What if we could do our compliance in an hour? And now the thing to think about here is in the context of PCI is kind of where we're putting some of our focus right now. We have a demo PCI profile you can run with OpenSCAP. Now the idea behind this is if you get a PCI audit, you pay your auditor, he comes in, he looks at all your stuff. It takes a long time, right? It's expensive. What if you could do a PCI audit? You could examine your entire infrastructure in 5 minutes. And that's kind of the idea there. Is what if we had a scanner that you could run, show the auditor the results, and they'll be happy with it. They'll say, yes, that looks good, or no, you fix this, and then everything's fine. And so that's kind of the idea there, right? And we're working on it, because PCI is just the first profile. We understand there's a lot more than just PCI out there. SCAP certification. This is a government certification we get on the SCAP scanner itself, actually. We have it on RHEL 5. We're nearly done with RHEL 6, and then we're going to work on RHEL 7. It's a long, complicated, horrible process. But it's coming, and I don't know if any of you care necessarily. It's one of those things, right, where if you need your compliance, you need your compliance. It's in the work. There's a lab happening. Check your schedule. There's one, I think, tomorrow and on Thursday. It's called Practical OpenSCAP. And it's being led by two very smart guys, Robin Price and Martin Priesler. And the idea there is they're going to show you these tools. They're going to show you what's going on, how to use this stuff, how you could apply it in your environment. And if it's something you care about, I'd highly recommend going and checking it out and talking to these guys. But if you don't want to attend the lab, because I know they're long, there's demos of all this stuff downstairs. Go check it out. It's very exciting, very cool. Release. Once we're done with a product, we have to give it to you guys, and you guys have to do something with it, right? If only it was that easy. So one of the things we've recognized, especially around security, is that documenting what's going on and how to deal with this stuff is really important. And we need to do a better job of that. Now, if you look on the Red Hat portal, there's already a bunch of really nice how-tos around documentation. Some of them are good, some of them need some work, we acknowledge that. But it's something we understand. We're working on this. We have a team of documentation people who are now dedicated just to security that will work on this stuff. It's coming, it's going to get better. The SCAP security guide is up here for a really weird reason. So I told you there's the oval data that defines all these SCAP rules. What if I told you that inside of that data were detailed descriptions of every rule, what it does and how it works? Why do we have that duplicated in an SCAP rule, which is machine readable, and again in something like the RHEL security guide? Because basically the RHEL security guide is based heavily on a lot of these OpenSCAP rules. So the idea is, what if we can start combining some of these things and making sure we only have one definitive source? So we will see where that goes. Pay attention in the future. Response. Who knows what a CVE ID is? None of you want to know what a CVE ID is. They are our nightmares. So in the past, there have been a number of security issues, things like Heartbleed and Shell Shock and Drown and Poodle and Venom, and I could go on for a long time. And those are just the ones that have names. Security issues get CVE IDs, which is just a boring identifier that no one ever remembers. And in fact, I was just at a hacker conference a couple weeks ago, and they had a contest called Name the CVE ID. And literally, these are guys who deal with this. Like, none of them, no one could even name one. Like, nobody remembers these IDs. That's good though, right? We want boring IDs. But here's the deal. Red Hat has something called the product security team that deals with this stuff. I worked on the product security team for 11 years at Red Hat at one point. And it's a big deal, right? These are all the RHSAs, all the security updates that Red Hat produces. Now, Microsoft and Red Hat are friends now, right? We're best buds, as everyone knows. If you check your literature that came with the bag, no question there. But here's the thing, is there was not so long ago that we'll say Microsoft and Red Hat weren't friends. But even back then, when we were doing our best to try to kill each other in public, they admitted that Red Hat did one of the best jobs when it came to doing security updates. And in fact, we work with them on a handful of things, right? This is something we've always taken seriously. But now it's time to bring it to the next level. Anyone who's read any of the news reports or advisories from these vendors about these horrible security issues that get a name know it's tricky. If you're the security researcher, you want to convince the world that you just found the worst security issue ever, right? And in some cases, they did that. Although if anyone paid attention to something called Badlock that came out not long ago, that backfired horribly on the researcher, right? He will say it did not work out the way he thought it would. But as a vendor, it's in our best interest to say everything's fine, no big deal. Don't worry about that security issue, right? And so you're always torn. Is what do we say? Do we play it down? Do we play it up? Where does Red Hat fit in this? And so what we try to do is we want to be the responsible adult in the room. We want to tell the truth, whatever that is. It might make us look bad. It might make us look good. I don't know. And I think open source helps us with this a lot. There have been instances in the past where we made some mistakes around security. And I honestly, I couldn't even remember what exactly it was to tell you anymore, not that I would. But I remember we screwed up some security updates. And we were trying to figure out what do we do to make ourselves look good when we fix this. That was interesting. But anyway, and I remember after going around in circles for days about what to do, we came to the realization, when you're an open source organization, when all your code is public, you can't hide. There's nothing we can do. And so it keeps us honest, which is great. But that's the idea, right? Now, I talked about earlier about CloudForms having the ability to scan your environment when something like Drown came out. See if you're running SSL v2, right? Well, we have another thing called Insights, which is it's a scanning tool. And I know there's Insights demos downstairs. The idea being, what if we can take all of Red Hat's collective knowledge, which we have a lot of because we have support people, and every time you give us a call, the support people log what happened and they write it down. That way we can reuse that knowledge again in the future. Well, what if we started turning that into something you can programmatically look at a system for? Like you find out if you're running this particular piece of hardware in this certain way, you're going to get a 20% performance loss, for example, right? What if we started writing that down in a way that a computer can do the scanning? And so that's what Insights does. But we apply it to security in the way that, let's say you're running SSL v2 with Drowned, which Insights would look at, but Insights could also tell you things like, all right, this computer over here, this computer has a public IP address. Fix it now. This computer over here doesn't, right? What if you could look at that stuff? Or you could say, this computer with the public IP, we can see that SSL v2 is disabled. But this one inside, SSL v2 isn't enabled, or is enabled. Fix this one first. And so this is some of the clever things we can start doing, especially around security, because let's face it, none of our budgets are going up, right? And so we have to figure out how do we do more with less. And especially in security, you want to make sure you're dealing with the critical things first. But what's critical? That's hard to understand sometimes. And so that's where a lot of this new knowledge and the ability to scan and do very interesting inspections is going to come into play, right? And then evolution, of course. We're going to change. We're going to get better. That's just the reality of it. The world is changing. We're paying attention. They also have, we publish all of our vulnerability data. A lot of people don't know this. In fact, we find people inside Red Hat who don't know this on a regular basis. We have an API now, it just came out I think last week, that lets you look up information about what is this security issue. You know, pick it by CVID, or you can say, give me all the security issues in RHEL 6. You say, give me all the security issues since this day. Again, APIs are kind of king, right? We now have an API just for our security data. You can start querying this for whatever needs you might have. SWID, Software ID, I don't know if any of you have heard of that. It's another one that's kind of coming out of the public sector as a standard. We're working on that. It is, today, we have something called CPE, which is Common Product Enumeration, and it's just a way to define what is in a product, and it doesn't work very well. SWID is kind of the next generation of that. SWID tags are coming. OVAL. That's the Open Vulnerability and Assessment Language. I had to write it down because I never remember it. So right now we have OVAL support for OpenSCAP in RHEL. It works very well. It works excellently there. We're going to expand that to all of our products. Now it's tricky because when we hit things like JBoss in the middleware space, you distribute middleware as zip files usually, right? How do you know it's in a zip file? It's kind of a pain, and that's actually where SWID comes into play, is where we tie all this stuff together. In CVSS v3, those of you who are security goons, you have CVSS scoring of security issues to decide what is bad and what is good. What do you need to fix first? V2 has been around for a long time, but V2, Heartbleed actually showed us V2 was a problem. Because when you scored Heartbleed in CVSS v2, it didn't look that bad. But I think we all know it was pretty bad. And so V3 fixes a lot of that. We actually just started attaching CVSS v3 scores to our advisories and our bugs. Did this about a month or two ago we started. We're going to keep the V2 scores around until 2017. So if this is something you care about, if you're using V2 today, start working on how you're going to start using V3 instead, because they're coming. Okay? Management and identity. This is my favorite slide of the whole presentation. This is all of Red Hat's stuff. Okay? This is kind of how our whole ecosystem fits together. And it's a little confusing and it's complicated. But here's the deal, all right? This is where everything is going. It's all about being able to manage your infrastructure. Managing your infrastructure no longer means you have a dude and a computer and he sits down and does stuff, right? It's all about these tools. You got to think this stuff on the bottom here, that's the foundation of Red Hat. And the stuff on top is how you make the foundation useful. And then you have to apply management to that, because you have to be able to manage what you're dealing with. And so I don't have a lot to say about the slide specifically other than go and see the management demos downstairs. This stuff is amazing what it can do. It's incredible. OpenSCAP, which I've talked about at length so far, satellite and cloud forms can just scan stuff. They have that built in, right? If you're running satellite in your infrastructure, you can run the OpenSCAP PCI profile and it can tell you what's going on in your environment. And it does it in a couple of minutes. It's fantastic. And managing this stuff. What machines are on? What machines are off? If I had to ask any of you, do you know what every system running in your environment today is? You would be probably lying to me if you could say you could. I know how much of it, this is a huge challenge. This is a problem for everybody, right? You're not special that you have a machine running somewhere no one can find. Everybody does. But this is where management is going to help, because if you start this stuff up with your management tools, you can keep track of it and know where it is. Identity is a big deal. You guys remember when identity was a special product you bought? You remember when you bought a TCP stack for your computer? Yeah. Identity is just kind of there now. It's something people have to use, and this is something we have. We have a bunch of identity talks going on for the rest of the week. We have the people who build this stuff are downstairs. They're in the booth. Go find them and talk to them. They love talking about it. They won't stop, right? You're going to have to sneak away. But here's the deal. SSSD, which is essentially a daemon that runs on the system that keeps track of some authentication things for you. It can tie in. We've got SSSD in a container now. That way you can do some interesting authentication across your container environment. IPA, same deal. IPA is our identity management solution. Put it in a container. Once we containerize some of this stuff, we can start doing interesting things with it. Active Directory support, big deal for everybody. It keeps getting better and better. I highly suggest you go and talk to those guys, see what they've got coming. I know in RHEL 7.3 there will be significant Active Directory integration improvements. 7.4 there will be even more, and 6.9 as well. Cached authentication, that's the ability to do some offline work, right, where you kind of get this auth information. SSSD helps with that. Smart cards. We all love smart cards. Anyone who's ever had to work with a smart card before knows how big of a pain it is, right? It's getting better. We're working on it. Session recording is going to be a big one that's coming soon. So one of the requirements you get in a lot of compliance is that if somebody logs into a system as root, you have to pay attention to what they're doing. You have to log their keystrokes, right? That's what session recording can do. It can keep track of what's happening, what is someone doing. Because let's face it, let's say you have an incident and they come back and say, what did Bob do on this computer? And you say, I don't know. You're going to have a bad day, right? Smart analysis. This comes back to CloudForms primarily. They have something called Smart State Analysis, in fact, is what it's called. But Insights is a part of this story. I mentioned Insights, right? Well, what if it could do machine learning and start looking for anomalies? What if audit had the ability to look for anomalies, right? What if we could look at all of the events happening all at once and start applying some of this interesting AI to it? So I don't know where this is going. I'm not going to lie to you. This one's a very fluffy pie-in-the-sky slide, but this is something. Go find these guys. Go find the Insights guys. Go find the CloudForms guys. Go find the audit guys. Ask them what's going on and to show you some demos of some of this stuff, because it's going to be exciting. And again, this comes back to the concept that we can't manage systems the way we used to. The days of a dude and a computer are gone. It's all about having these tools to tie everything together and pay attention to it as a whole. Now, where do we go next? Right? This is kind of where the real interesting questions start to come. Containers are huge. Containers won, as far as I'm concerned. So now what do we do with them? It's easy to say, containerize everything. Everything we deploy goes in containers now, right? I'm sure you guys have all worked with people who say that. What does that mean, though? How do we keep this stuff secure? How do we make sure we understand what it is? And we don't have all the answers today. I'm not going to lie to you. We have some of them, but we don't have them all. And this is the last bullet point there, is help us. Help us figure it out. I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of questions. I'm sure you guys have more questions and answers than I do, though. And I acknowledge that, right? It's that open source way. We all have to work together. Compliance. If you don't have to deal with compliance today, you will soon. There isn't an industry on the planet that isn't going to have compliance concerns at some point in the near future. And that's terrifying, right? Brace yourselves. Compliance is coming. So, but again, once we have all this smart analysis going on, this is going to be less important than it is today. Where's the industry going? We don't know. Nobody knows. I've never seen security change so much so fast as I have in the last probably year. What does that mean? No idea. It's my problem, though. So if you guys know, come find me and tell me what's going on. But fundamentally, this is part of what Red Hat does. We've got to pay attention to what's going on, and we've got to make sure we can all get there, right? And of course, who doesn't want to invent the future? We've got some smart dudes here. We've got a lot of smart dudes here. And everything going on, all of the interesting new work happening in the universe today is happening in open source. There is very little stuff you see. That innovation, it's not coming out of the closed source shops anymore. And so we have an opportunity to start inventing the future of open source, especially around security, right? Now, these are the security sessions happening at the summit. You missed the first one, or you were here, and it's done now. The circle is me. Excuse me. And these are the rest. I highly suggest you check them out. Everything I have talked about today is covered in here somewhere. And there's more than that as well, in fact, because I cover a very broad range of topics. But I'm going to leave this one up. I have a closing slide that doesn't matter. But I can leave this up. We've got a few minutes. I'm happy to take questions. And if there's something you guys want to talk about, come find me. You know, just come find me and talk to me. I'd love to chat about anything you can think about at all. So, questions, comments, concerns? Yes?
Why are we still shipping rail with core security as coming out of the box?
I do.
All these, like crypto turned on using, things that are really not secure. I mean, some things they've changed recently, but they still, why aren't we meeting SCAP right out of the box?
You can do that, actually. He's asking about, what about security right out of the box, right? And our goal, in all seriousness, is to make it as secure as possible with the default install. But I acknowledge we've got work to do. But what we do have that's really neat is in the Anaconda installer, which you can leverage with Kickstart, you can apply an SCAP profile at install time. That went into rel 7.2, which means basically you can say, like, you can use your OpenSCAP workbench, define your baseline, then apply that profile to your install, and pow, you've got it right there at install time. So that's something. Go find the SCAP guys and the Anaconda guys downstairs, and they can give you a demo of that. It's very cool.
I'm stuck on 6, probably for the next 15 years.
Then I don't have a great answer for you today, unfortunately. However, you can still run SCAP, after install and apply those profiles. And of course, let's talk, right? Let's see if we can't come up with something. Anyone else?
I noticed that you were not mentioning at your first slide about you have security solutions everywhere. But in the kernel itself, preventing a single error from being critical and destroying everything that the kernel does. Defense in depth inside the kernel, is that something that's, or kernel hardening as it's called, is that something you're working on or pushing for?
Yes, absolutely. So the question was about kernel hardening and defense in depth in the kernel. And there's something called the kernel hardening project that's going on today. Case Cook works on that. He's from Google. But this is where we have some people interested in this. We're trying to understand, what does it mean? Where do we go? How do we benefit from this? How do we work together? And so I don't have a good answer today, but absolutely it's on the list, right? And hopefully next year when I give this talk, I'll have something I can say about that. So, all right, someone on this side this time. Yes? Every security session is being recorded. This fine gentleman here, that's blocking some of the people behind him, is he's recording these so you can watch them on YouTube later. And I don't have magic, so even if we weren't, I could get you into them, so I apologize for that. In fact, they won't let me into them either. So, yes?
All right, cool. I've been a Linux system administrator for 21 years now, so I know at least a couple things here or there. And yet, more often than I'd like, Red Hat Security Advisory comes out that makes me feel stupid. And what I mean by that is a lot of the explanations say things like, a process able to allocate a blah, 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 something may be able to. I don't always have any clue what that stuff means. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. And there's rarely any good resources for me to figure that out. I mean, short of opening a support case and saying, I don't know what this means, tell me if I care. You guys do a great job on the big name vulnerabilities. A lot of times the pages special pages you put up for those things are the best explanations
Sure.
and that I've seen anywhere. But for a lot of the other stuff, I may get an email saying, critical security. I have no idea if it applies to my environment in some cases, and it's very hard for me when I'm trying to assess the urgency of these things sometimes it's very hard to know, like, does this affect my systems at all?
Sure. So I can say two things. First of all, it is almost certainly my fault that was done, because
no, talk to the right guy.
A lot of that text was done by me and a handful of other people long ago, and we reuse a lot of it, of course. But fundamentally, tell them. You can either open a support ticket, which is fine, and just say, I don't understand this and I would like a better explanation. But this is kind of coming back to that responsible adult in the room, is historically, the security guys have been just a bunch of crazy people. But now it needs to expand, and we need to work better with others. And part of that is being able to talk about this stuff. And we know that some of these explanations are poor for normal people to understand who aren't in the middle of this like security mosh pit that's going on, but we don't know which ones they are always. So in all seriousness, like, call me, email me, email security@redhat.com, open a support case, just let us know.
That was going to be my next question, I guess, is that if I come across one that I think is particularly hard to understand, like
let us know.
Security at Red Hat?
Absolutely, let us know, and we will do whatever we can to start improving some of this text. And again, when I mentioned, I had the documentation slide. We have a team working on this documentation now, and the idea is to make this better. And we want to be your trusted security source. That is our goal here. And if we're not, we're failing as far as I'm concerned. Anyone else? I know I'm holding us back from lunch. Yes? Yes. This, yeah, that story is unfortunately more common than I'd like to ever. Basically, the question was, they install, you said a Symantec product? Doesn't matter, there's lots of these. Install a Symantec security product. You have to disable SELinux for it to work right. Okay, that seems like a bit of an oxymoron in a lot of instances. And this is a problem. It is now my job to start fixing that. So what I'm doing is I'm starting to reach out to these organizations and see how can we work together, how can we make sure SELinux can be left on and actually work. And part of that is going to come back to this, the SELinux CIL, that intermediary language I mentioned that's coming out in 7.3, is going to start making that easier so we can modify this policy and support these programs. But yes, that is a problem. It is probably like number 3 on my list of things we need to fix around security at Red Hat. Absolutely. Yes?
Like a lot of audits, their primary motivation is to issue this report that comes back in with as many vulnerabilities as they can possibly announce. We call it the shock and awe approach. And that usually comes in the format of a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
CVE vulnerabilities. And we do a lot of manual correlation.
Yep.
It used to be worse because they would actually see the back door, they would just banner the versions of things and report that you're vulnerable to a bunch of stuff that weren't. But doing that manual step takes so much time.
Yep.
In the meantime, their like I said, the primary motivation is to make it look like your admins are a bunch of keystone cops. They love to do loud things. Is there any shortcut to that process where we can have more direct interface with the auditors and work with them on verifying and tracking remediation?
So the idea there is that's why we created that vulnerability API I mentioned a little while ago, was the long-term goal, we're not going to get there yet, is we want these auditors and these tool vendors to be able to query our data easily, to pull that in and understand what's going on. And now, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you today other than let us know and we can try to work with the auditor or the vendor, because I've had some luck actually sitting down with some of these guys and explaining what Red Hat does, how we work, and then what can we do together to make life better. Because, I mean, let's face it, we hate it when this happens, you guys hate it when this happens, and as hard as this is to believe, they don't like it either. So it's in everyone's best interest to start making some of this much better, because let's face it, even if they get it all right, their laundry list of problems is still going to be ridiculous. So it's not like they're going to have to worry about that, right? Anyone else? Awesome. All right, gang, lunchtime.